For purposes of this tax course, we're going to be using the 2016 tax laws, and we'll be working only with the Form 1040, or what we call the long form. We're going to make our way down the 1040 line by line. Working through a few examples hopefully will eliminate the intimidation factor that this form holds over most of our heads. Now, if you were to look at the 1040, you'll see that it's divided into sections. So what we're going to do is divide and conquer. The first section is the name and address section, easy enough. The next section on the 1040 is where we choose our filing status on the tax return. Next, we'll list our exemptions, yourself, a spouse, any dependents that you might claim on your return. Next, lines 7 through 22 cover our income, and then on line 22 is where we calculate our total income. Next section is what we call the adjusted gross income, or AGI, and we come up with a total of our AGI on line 37. Flipping over to page 2, the next section is tax and credits. Line 38 is simply a regurgitation of line 37, the adjusted gross income. The next section, other taxes, where we would calculate other taxes on our return, such as self-employment tax if we owned a business. Line 63, this is where we would calculate the total tax on our tax return. Next, we come to the payments section, lines 64 through 74. And then, if we're owed a refund, we calculate the refund, or if we have an amount due, we calculate the amount due on the return. And finally, the signature blocks. This is where you would sign and date your return. Now let's talk about filing status. The filing status on the return. Remember, that was the first section after the name and address section. This is where we're going to choose the most advantageous filing status for us. There are 5 filing statuses: single, married filing jointly, married filing separately, head of household, and qualifying widow or widower with dependent child. First, let's talk about the head of household filing status. You must be unmarried or considered unmarried on the last day of the year to claim the head of household filing status. You must have paid more than half the cost of keeping up a home for the year, and a qualifying person must have lived with you for more than half the year. So what does it mean to be considered unmarried? Well, some married taxpayers who live apart from their spouses and provide for dependent children may be considered unmarried for tax purposes. These taxpayers are permitted to file as head of household and receive the benefit of lower tax amounts that are associated with the head of household filing status if they file a return separate from their spouse for the tax year. You're considered unmarried if they paid more than half the cost of keeping up their home for the year, and if they lived apart from their spouse during the entire last 6 months of the tax year. The spouse is considered to have lived in the home even if he or she was temporarily absent due to special circumstances such as military service or education. And provided the main home for more than half the year of a dependent child, stepchild, or foster child, and the foster child has to be placed in the home by an authorized agency. What's the definition of a qualifying person for this head of household filing status? Well, to qualify for the head of household filing status, a qualifying person, again, needs to live in the taxpayer's home for more than half the year. Only certain types of closely related relatives can be considered qualifying persons for the head of household filing status. Qualifying person is a child, stepchild, adopted child, foster child, brother or sister, or a descendant of one of these, whom the taxpayer or you claim as a dependent under the qualifying children rules. A qualifying person is also a child, a stepchild, adopted child, a foster child, brother or sister, or a descendant of one of these, whom you would be eligible to claim as a dependent under the qualifying children rules, but you choose not to claim as a dependent because you released the dependent's exemption to a non-custodial parent. A qualifying person is also a mother or father who can be claimed as a dependent under what's known as the qualifying relative rules. And a qualifying person is a brother, sister, grandparent, niece, or nephew whom you can claim as a dependent under the qualifying relative rules. So what's the big deal about filing head of household? Why are we talking about this filing status first? Well, taxpayers claiming the head of household filing status benefit from a higher standard deduction and lower tax rates compared to the single filing status. Next, we'll move on to the qualifying widow or qualifying widower filing status. If your spouse died in 2016, you can use married filing jointly as your filing status. You must have a child or stepchild for whom you can claim an exemption in order to use the qualifying widow or widower filing status. You may be eligible to use the qualifying widow or widower filing status for 2 years following the year of death of your spouse. What are the advantages of the qualifying widow or widower filing status? Well, this filing status entitles you to use married filing joint tax return rates and the highest standard deduction amount. We'll talk about the standard deduction in a later video. Next, we'll talk about the married filing separately filing status. Each spouse files an individual return claiming his or her own income and exemptions in the married filing separate category or filing status. Taxes are generally higher for this status, generally higher. Some credits are unavailable and some are reduced. Some taxpayers file separately in order to avoid a potential refund offset due to a spouse's bad behavior or outstanding debts. In summary, there are 5 filing statuses: single, married filing jointly, married filing separately, head of household, and qualifying widow or widower with a dependent child. Filing status selection can definitely have an impact on the amount of tax, credits, and deductions on the tax return. And you want to choose the filing status that results in the lowest tax. In most cases, a married couple will pay a lower total tax amount if they file a joint return. If they choose to file separately, they must typically show their spouse's name and social security number on the return. In general, the head of household status is for unmarried taxpayers who paid more than half the cost of keeping up a home for a qualified person during the tax year. However, some married taxpayers who lived apart from their spouse and provided for dependent children may be considered unmarried and qualify to file using the head of household filing status. A widow or a widower with one or more dependent children may be able to use the qualifying widow or widower with dependent child filing status, which is only available for 2 years following the year of the spouse's death. Next, we'll go over some review questions. The questions are multiple choice and true-false. You'll have an opportunity to read through the question, select an answer, and then the answer will appear immediately after the question. So just jot down your answer on a scratch sheet of paper, check yourself, and make sure that you understand what's going on in each lesson. Good luck.